wait to see my gal. I can't wait to see my
I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Chenoweth? Present. Mr. Hayes?
Present.
Ms. Huth? Here. Mr. Island?
Here.
Ms. Pat?
Present.
Mr. Whiteman?
Here.
Ms. Lyman? Here. Mayor White.
Here. See, the first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Got a motion and a second. Any additions or corrections? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any additions to the agenda this evening? Okay, petitions and communications. If anybody in public would like to speak to the council for a period of no more than 5 minutes, if you'll pick up one of these white cards at the back of the room and bring it up to myself or the clerk, you'll have a chance to do so. We've got a couple of cards here. Rena Lentz, 1710 South Vine, says she supports the tram project but does not wish to speak. And Carl Nad of 2212 Pond Street, also in support but does not wish to speak. Is there anybody else in the public that would like to present petitions or communications to the council this evening? Yes, Ms. Chenoweth?
I'd like to request an update on UPTV be put on either our next committee meeting or the first committee meeting that has some available space on it.
Okay.
We met as a commission and we're ready to present to council kind of the long-term plan for UPTV.
Okay. Well, we can do that either next week probably, or do you want to do under reports of special committees at the next council meeting, which would be April 5th?
Either way, depends on, if the agenda's heavy next week, we can wait till council meeting.
Okay.
It's up to you.
Well, we'll do that. Any other petitions or communications from council members? Yes, Mr. Whalen?
I must apologize. I'm not feeling well tonight. I came down to vote on this tram issue because it's so very important financially and in so many other ways. I also wanted to offer my approval of the downtown action plan for downtown Urbana, which I think is very forward-looking. However, I offer this caveat. It seems to me to be rather, how do I say it? One, thinking things forward and thinking in a visionary state of mind, to close Springfield Avenue to traffic to support the university's north-south in the way that it is closed, it seems to me to be fully in error. And that is that it provides false security for the students, pedestrians, because they don't know, and the automobile people don't understand. But it's not directly connected to this, of course. But I want to say that somewhere there should be an effort to change that access route, getting a stop sign which is clearly provides security for pedestrians. This is the one by the Granger
Crosswalk
the
that lights
crosswalk.
up.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know what you're talking about.
Sorry. But I think it's just not very good traffic control. And I've talked with Ms. Huth about this, and Ms. Huth supports that wholeheartedly. And I cannot, though I do think that Ms. Huth and Ms. Chenoweth's efforts in this downtown action plan is very good. And so I would support that. But I think that we must look at that crosswalk idea. It's poor traffic control.
Hey, any other petitions?
I must say, excuse me again, Mr. Mayor, I won't stay here for the whole meeting. I just don't feel up to it tonight. So I'll ask your forgiveness.
Any other petitions and communications from council members?
Since Mr. Whalen's, could I just ask him one question to clarify what he said? Thank you. Are you saying you don't want to see more, you don't want to see crosswalks like the one by Granger in downtown? Was that your point?
Yes.
Or are you saying
Yes.
we should do something about the
No,
one?
in downtown. I think it's
Okay.
it's a very poorly designed traffic control method. A stop sign, or a stoplight, which is clear, would be much safer for the pedestrian. Someday, somebody may...
You have anything else, Ms. Pat?
Does
No,
that
no,
answer your
Look at it
question?
later. Yeah, yes, it did. I'm clear on what you were saying. Thank you.
There's no old business, so we'll go right to the reports of standing committees. Ms. Huth, are you the chair?
Very likely. First up for the committee, from the Committee of the Whole, we have ordinance number 2004-03-025, an ordinance approving a development agreement with Michelle's Bridal Shop, Inc. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Huth?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries. Ms. Huth?
Sorry. Next up, from the Committee of the Whole, we have resolution number 2004-03-004, resolution of support of the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District's continued exploration of the benefits of a fixed guideway or tram system for the community. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Yes, since we have MTD officials here, I just wanted to add my comments that I think I made to them individually, that I think if this tram process moves forward, in addition to comments I made last time regarding the issue of taxes, and I think the importance of looking at an MTD district-wide tax, increase rather than donations or commitments of funds from city tax revenues, I think that it would be better, and from people I've heard from, to have the tram go down Springfield Avenue into Urbana rather than through Green Street. I think it would create less among people who live in that neighborhood, and I just wanted to pass that on since you're here. Thank you.
Mr. Costello from the MTD, is there any objection to hearing from Mr.
Not at all. No.
Brief. One of the things I want to make clear that perhaps was not clear last week is that any mapping that's even done now is merely musings, and that anything that we would do would be in coordination with your city, frankly with the council as well, so that those kinds of issues are addressed. So, you know, we're not going to just single-handedly pick to go. So, I mean, I'm pleased to give you that assurance, but I not only want to give you that assurance, I also want you to realize the importance that we feel in your participation in terms of having some say in if something like this were to take place, where's it going to go in our community.
We do have somebody that has asked for petitions and communications from the public on this topic. Ms. Leslie, I assume Leslie Sherman, 505 South McCullough. Leslie? Speak.
I just wanted to give my, I'm in Ward 1, and I do support the tram measure, which is you. And I hope that you will vote for it because we do, as you should know by now, having researched it as well to represent your wards, there's a need, we have a problem with with the MTD on Wright Street specifically, and that's going to grow. And the tram is a good solution for it. So I, a member of, or a citizen of Urbana, do support it and hope that you will vote in support of letting them continue to see how we will fund it, potentially. So that's it. Thank you. Uh-huh. No? Okay.
We have another, if the council is still willing to indulge public comment at this time. Michael Kilcullen, 725 South State. Champaign.
Yes, for the moment until I get moved over to this side of town.
Here are the ground rules. You have up to 5 minutes.
First of all, I was here last. I talked with a few of you in between the breaks and all that. My name is Michael Kilcullen. I'm a new student at the University of Illinois Urban Planning, specializing in transportation planning. I have my master's degree. I've also worked with a trucking company for a year. I've worked with Amtrak for 12 years, and I also have my bachelor's of business in transportation. I want to make some statements. I have handed out a thing that has more text that you can read later at your leisure. I want to just state a few points that I do support a study for the tram. I actually think that the tram official to the Champaign-Urbana and University area. But all transportation gets subsidies, including the highways, the airports, the railroads. So the idea of the tram being paid for, so the idea of a tram being paid for by or with tax money or with fares is not unheard of. Every transportation mode in Champaign-Urbana and in this country gets subsidies. There's how the city of Champaign-Urbana doesn't seem to have enough population to support a tram, but there's that thought. And Champaign-Urbana is one of the smallest cities that has been looked at, but the population size alone is not the only factor. You have to look at numbers as well. And the CUMTD has had a comparison study that the ridership here of 10 million people a year matches that of Indianapolis and exceeds such as Omaha or Des Moines and Tampa even. So the ridership, I think, will support a tram, even though it's a open a tram this summer. But they have a very similar service characteristics. Their tram is about 1.6 miles long. They have two downtowns kind of disjointed with the university campus in the middle, and the ridership has just exceeded all their expectations. Just the first quarter, they just finished 183,000 riders in just the first full quarter, 3 months that they've been open, is just astounding for a city of 190,000 people. There's also, some information about urban transit as compared starting with buses. As ridership increases, you convert to light rail. As ridership increases again, then you can convert to subway or heavier rail. And we are talking about a congestion problem of ridership exceeding every year or increasing every year, that, and especially in the Wright Street area at the university campus area, that within maybe 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I think it is feasible that the ridership will be sufficient to support a tram system, and then the buses can be used for lighter ridership routes, such as the fringes, such as the community routes that are away from the university. As far as the highways are funded by the public, and I think the tram system being part of an entire transportation mix should be funded as well by some methods. This study that's being proposed to be done is not necessarily saying that every taxpayer is going to pay at this point. There are various creative ways, and we can look and see this airport, Willard Airport, is getting Cincinnati service 3 times a day in May, and it's payer money, but they took donations, and they're taking ticket trust ideas and stuff. So there are...
About 1 minute left.
Thank you. So there are other ways, but the study has to be done first to even determine what can be done. So if we say no now to the study, we're going to close off the possibilities or alternatives that might exist. In closing, I would like to say that the study will examine of transportation, of the economy, of future growth and community. So I say support the study so that Champaign will and Urbana, will continue to be a livable community for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
And I would entertain any questions if anyone has.
And if the council indulges, Mr. Carlisle will like to speak. George, you want to go ahead and take the seat there?
I'm George Carlisle, 14. Yeah, I was here last week commenting on the tram system. Then I had an editorial that was in Friday's News Gazette reminding, based on that, I think the funding for the tram, the tax burden on the motor vehicles rather than property tax. Last week, Paul E. Smith, who was my high school physics teacher, commented he was afraid that if property taxes were increased, he would have to keep raising the rents on his apartments. And all those bus or rent apartments do face annual rent increases because of increased property taxes, keep the building insurance and so forth. Well, all these cars in this town, it seems like if we had an annual sticker fee on cars, that would go a long way toward funding transit. I remember when I was a child, we did be on cars. I think it was only $5 then. It'd probably have to be somewhere on the order of $50 to $100, perhaps on a sliding scale by vehicle size consumption. If that's not possible, we may have to impose an extra city gas tax at the pump. But I say provide that all three, Champaign, Savoy, and Urbana have the same city gas tax, wouldn't be crossing the lines to save taxes like they do in some go out of state for gasoline and cigarettes and so forth. Savoy should annex to the mass transit district to provide better bus. I wouldn't go all that way, but if it went down to the research park, they could transfer there to get to campus. So they would certainly benefit by annexation. And a sticker fee, then we could differentiate between resident and non-resident vehicles, so we could charge more for parking for the non-resident people coming to the football games, as they seem to be the ones that congest the streets. So especially I wish they'd done that during the Bears game. So much traffic. If we have a good season that attracts many people to come to the games, then we could charge more. Because after all, those people aren't paying our taxes. It's the same principle as the university charging higher out-of-state tuition, or some states charge non-resident larger entrance fees to the state parks. But we do need to fund the tram system by the tax burden being on motor vehicles, and that might encourage fuel costs. As Mr. Hammock said, our supply of petroleum is likely to run out in 20 to 40 years unless we conserve more.
Occasions. Let's see, do we have a motion and a second on this? Any council discussion?
I spoke at length last week in support of this resolution, and I won't repeat myself. I do want to thank the MTD. There are a number of representatives here, and I pretty much barraged them with questions for about 2 weeks. Many of those questions were questions I received from my constituents, and I've been communicating regularly with constituents. I have an email listserv of about 400 or 500 people on it, and have heard some concerns, but no one who in my ward have I heard from say, don't go forward with additional studies. So at this point, I will continue to support this, and I thank my constituents for their input, and it's been overwhelmingly favorable for this vote.
Other discussion?
Thank you. I think the projections of potential problems on Wright Street are to solve the problem for Wright Street. The big problem that most people see with the tram, actually two problems. One, the cost. It just costs too much. And the other is that it will not serve most people in Champaign-Urbana. And I think when you put those two together, that most people in Champaign-Urbana will not be served by it, and it will cost our community $35 to $50 million. It's no surprise that a lot of people feel this is not a project that we should pursue. I won't go on at length as I did last week, but I have heard from a lot of people in the last week who have thanked me for the comments. They expressed well their perspective, and those really are the 2 points, that most people aren't going to live anywhere near the tram, so it won't be useful to them, and the cost is just more than we can afford.
Okay, any other discussion? Whalen.
I haven't changed my mind. The people I've spoken with to a person, and in the street during the day, I go from business to business, talk with the public, just average people, and people who ride the bus, people who ride bikes, and people who drive cars. Not one person to me has said, exclaimed how excited they were about the tram. In fact, they thought it was goofy. And I think that the meeting we had here last week was not at all representative of in this community. It was largely people in support of this tram system, and that does not reflect the majority of people in the city. I think Ms. Pat is right. The cost is too much, and it will not serve people in the community. It's a very limited route if it's what has been projected comes to pass. It's so inflated. It was the tram system, or the trolley system, if you like, was done away with because of its inflexibility and because of the flexibility of the bus. The buses can go anywhere. Same thing that the trolley or tram will do, and that is, if you wanted to bring out economic development along a route, why can't you do that with a bus? There's no answer to that. The MTD has spent $500,000 supposedly to date. I think it's more. We haven't had an accounting of that, so we don't really know. But for all of that money expended, no. There are questions that have been asked that are very simple questions that haven't been answered. Frankly, I find it very disappointing that members of the board, the MTD board, they don't answer my calls or return my calls. And thank goodness that the efforts on your achievement, but I do not compliment you on this effort because I think that there is too much unknown after that expenditure of $500,000. Now you're asking us to go forward and go further in research. For what reason? What have you answered? Tell me. Tell the city. What have we discovered that we didn't know before? Let's see, the gentleman who just spoke, Mr. Kilcullen, remarks that FTA money will go somewhere, so it should come here. That is the craziest logic I've ever heard. Just because there's a camel in the desert, there's no reason why we need to have a camel here. Just because the government is giving money away to cities that need improved traffic, improved transit systems, that's good. That's where it should go. We don't need it. And it's a misuse and a waste to bring it here. And I think that effort is very poorly guided. I cannot say enough that the people in this city, the majority, the vast majority, do not support this idea. A handful of people do. And a lot of money is being spent. And it's not doing anything that we think it needs to be done. I am firmly opposed to moving further with this. I see it as only causing in the future more tax expenditure. And there's nothing I can say because I'm so outnumbered here. But the people on the street aren't outnumbered. They're not outnumbered, and they know, and they think that this system is not an improvement. And I think the thing to do is to listen to them and not to just ourselves, not to just those who favor it. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion?
Yeah, I just want to add a few more comments. I think that the gentleman who spoke, Mr. Kilcullen, made transportation get subsidies, and I think that's not something that we always think about with the train lines and airports and even roads, where we get motor fuel tax for some of the road work that the city does. I have to say that I've gotten mixed comments. I'm on the WUNA listserv, and for all of you on that listserv, I think there have been a lot of comments in support of it. I've also gotten phone calls at home, several against the proposed tram plan, and some for it. I didn't keep a tally of exactly how it is, but I do agree that people are really concerned about the money issue, and I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind, not just well, in addition to the entire cost, specifically how much, what the burden would be for individual tax, be through property tax, sales tax, an increase in the MTD, the tax that's paid, and then who would be able to use it and where it would go. My vote, as I believe last week, is based on the idea that this is not a commitment that the city of Urbana or the council will agree to raise taxes in the future in order to pay for a portion of the proposed tram if it goes through. I think that's an issue in addition to where the tram would go that needs to be studied, as well as people talked about the fact that this would be smart growth, that having a tram would attract populations to live closer to the center of town rather than moving to the outskirts. And I think that we also need to look at possible effects, and I hope the MTD looks at the effects of living based on the total amount of tax. And if they live outside of the MTD tax district, would they then, of course, that would be more sprawl, I think, than if they were to live in the center town and pay a higher tax, whether it be the school district, the property tax, and other taxes. So I think we have to look at those and continue to evaluate 5, 10, 15, 20 years that this plan gets evaluated. Finally, I think that I want to just make clear that by voting, I think anyone is saying that this, well, at least I'm not saying that this is the most important project or proposal that's before the city or before our community. I think when we look at reasons to raise taxes and to support increased revenues of some sort would be from, I think everyone supports raising money for the schools and making sure that they are adequately funded. But the reason I'm voting for this, changed my mind and decided to vote for this, is to allow and support the MTD in getting federal funds to continue to study this and look at possible funding mechanisms for the future. Is an idea to commit my vote on the council floor for future funds by the city.
All those in favor of this resolution?
Call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Whalen's asked for a roll call. Ms. Clark, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Huth?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
No.
Mr. Whalen?
No.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries with 5 ayes. Ms. Huth?
Next up from the Committee of the Whole, we have ordinance number 2004-03-024, an ordinance annexing certain territory to the city of Urbana, approximately 31 total acres on 3 separate tracts located on the south side of Colorado Avenue, approximately 395 feet east of Philo Road, Hinkton and Noggle Tract. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on this annexation ordinance. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Huth?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 ayes. Ms. Huth?
Next up, we have ordinance number 2004-03-027, an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution of an annexation agreement, Dennis Onstead and John North, former dog club site. So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Notice, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Huth?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Mayor Satterthwaite?
Yes. That motion carries with 7 ayes. Ms. Huth?
Last up, we have a motion approving an action plan for downtown Urbana. So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay. At this point, I'd like to thank Ms. Huth and Ms. Chenoweth for their work. The press conference a couple weeks ago was very well attended and put awful lot of work into this, and gives us all something to put our shoulder behind. I think everyone is in favor of seeing investment and redensification of our downtown area. So thanks for your work. Yes, Ms. Chenoweth.
I announced that Tang Dynasty is now open for business. It is the Asian restaurant in Lincoln Square. People may know there's been a lot of discussion with quite a bit of public input about having windows to look into Lincoln Square. It's kind of a box in the middle of downtown, and the owner and manager with the city and have definitely embraced this notion that we have in our campaign to build downtown. To take it outside is one of the pieces of the campaign, and Tang Dynasty will have outdoor seating. They will have windows to the outside. They do have windows to the outside. And so people will be able to, in the warmer months, I do believe we might have snow in the next couple of days, but in the warmer months, you will be able to go and have a meal at Tang Dynasty or Milo or any of the other fine restaurants we have in our downtown. It's the end of Lincoln Square Mall for those who are listening at home and would like to know where to go.
Yes, Ms. Pat.
I have a question. Speaking of Crane Alley, I hear a rumor that food will be served there soon. Do you know any details
Any
about
day
that?
now.
Is it any day now?
I work above them, so I'll smell it when it comes, but I haven't smelled anything yet, so.
Been in there, but
Oh,
it's
so
not.
they-
hooked
so
up
it's
yet.
They're
happening.
ready to
Okay.
go, so it's just a matter of when they unveil.
And I was at Lincoln Square Saturday, and I smelled something delicious, but Tang Dynasty wasn't open yet. Did it just open? Or were they open?
It
Was
was
today
today.
the first
I
day?
think today was the first day.
Oh, wonderful.
That are in downtown, they've got an official ribbon cutting on Thursday at 4 o'clock. But it's kind of a soft opening right now before they're officially ready to cut the ribbon.
We could eat there tomorrow, huh? Is it? Oh, good to know. I'm going.
Hey, any other discussion on the downtown plan? All right, seeing no more discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Reports of special committees. Any special committee reports? Reports of officers. Mr. Walden?
Mr. Mayor, I am pleased to council tonight our 2004 update of our financial planning tool that we've been using here in Urbana for the last decade. Council members know prior to our budget process, take a look at where we're going to be long-term in each of these funds based on our assumptions of expenditures and revenues, and make the short-term budget decisions in the context of these longer-term plans. And that has been something we've done for a number of years now, and we have spent some time, particularly given the revenue decline in the last couple of years, through these numbers, and I think you have our best estimates at this point of where we are and where we're going to be. So you can use that in the context of the budget decisions that you'll be making in the next couple months. We're working hard on the budget. Should be announcing that the first week in May. So that's where we are on the financial. Also on your desk, you'll find a copy of a PowerPoint slide presentation that was made to several of us last Friday by Ameren officials in regard to their process and where they are in their acquisition of Illinois Power. They're in the early of looking at the systems and the issues related to some of the community input that has been provided to them via some of the hearings that we've, as well as their understanding of the area. This was an initial attempt to address some of those issues, although it's very preliminary. We found it interesting, and again, we're very early in this process. We do expect that Ameren will file with them as an intervenor with the City of Champaign in that case. So they understand that and expect that, and so we're moving forward on all of those fronts. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Any other reports of officers? So we'll move on to new business. First item under new business is an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Urbana, Illinois with respect to the standards and regulations for the B1 Neighborhood Business Zoning District. This was plan case number 1878-T-04. Ms. Tyler?
This is a text amendment that was discussed several months ago at City Council and came about from concern about some neighborhood businesses that were really operating and functioning more as larger businesses and impacting the nearby residential uses. So it's now just a year ago that we presented some ideas to City Council for this text amendment and talked about creating amendments to our B1 neighborhood business zone. The direction we got, general direction, kind of a tall order perhaps, would be to carefully consider the B1 district so that we could better achieve compatibility between uses, but not go so far as to be a disincentive to establishing a new business in the district. So the balance here is to help promote neighborhood businesses, but to look for ways to ensure that those businesses are harmonious and compatible to the necessary nearby residential uses. We did draft some text amendment ideas and held public hearings these last few months, starting January 22nd, continued to February 19th, and then finally on March 4th, they forwarded the enclosed amendments to council. Some of the direction, again, that we worked with would be to visit businesses in the neighborhood business zone, to protect adjacent residents and to make the neighborhood business development easier. And some of this would require additional scrutiny under special use permit. We looked also at the amount of signage in neighborhood business as perhaps not being as great as that required for general business. We looked at the setback requirements to make them more consistent, and we looked for not just existing neighborhood business areas, but future new neighborhood business areas. So those were the elements that were reviewed in the text amendment and by the Plan Commission. Summary of the changes for the text amendment: accessory to principal uses and requiring a conditional use permit in those cases where there would be a drive-through facility. So currently we have fast food restaurants which require a conditional use permit, but does seem to be a prevalence of increasing use of drive-through facilities for other types of business uses. So we wanted to have a chance to look at those through the conditional use permit process to ensure that those did not create nuisances for nearby residential uses. On the table of uses, several changes are proposed. 3 uses are proposed to no longer be permitted in the B1 district at all. In review, we did not feel that these really belonged in the neighborhood business district, and those include bookbinding, confectionery products, manufacturing and packaging, and automobile, truck, trailer, or boat sales. And of course, in doing this, we did have a inventory of existing neighborhood business sites and businesses. So we were cognizant of not creating nonconformities where that was avoidable. We also have a list of uses that would no longer be permitted by right, but only with a special use permit. That is, they would go through the Plan Commission and City Council. These include convenience store, drugstore, principal use parking garage or lot, and motion picture production studio. And these were really based on the intensity and the types of versus a larger scale. And this is really in response to the trend of some types of retail uses having a big box component. The big box pet store as opposed to the neighborhood pet store. The big box shoe store, little big boxes, I'm talking not, super boxes as opposed to your neighborhood shoe store. And I could give you an example, Payless as opposed to Andy's Shoes, that kind of situation. So what we did here is propose that where these uses are 2,500 square feet or less in gross square footage, they be allowed by right, and where they exceed the 2,500 gross square feet, they be allowed by conditional use permit. These include antique or used furniture sales and service, arts and crafts store, studio, apparel shop, pet store, sporting goods, shoe store, cafe, restaurant, dry cleaning or laundry, health club, fitness, photo sales or service, bicycle sales and service. Similar categories would be over 2,500 square feet would require the special use permit, and those would be supermarkets. Next, we looked at the yard and fencing requirements. There seemed to be a little bit of lack of rationale in some of these requirements, particularly as they pertain to adjacency to residential or other uses. We recommend amending the side yard setback requirement from 0 feet to 7 feet, again trying to buffer these uses from adjacent likely residential uses. We also recommended requiring 6-foot high wood or masonry fence along the rear yard. This is instead of a landscape buffer, and this was finding with the Plan Commission that the landscape buffers are not always sufficient, and really the fencing is a preferred buffering when a residence is adjacent to a business use. And so we find that as well in the side or rear yard B1 lots next to the lower residential districts, and as an alternative landscape buffer in the higher residential districts. Use these to allow one sign per business frontage. One freestanding sign per site instead of one sign per business frontage, really recognizing that neighborhood business are smaller sites and would not need as much signage as a larger business, and also that the wall-mounted signs be prohibited where they face a residential use or zone unless there's a right-of-way separating those. There were a number of issues that came up in discussion of B1 that we weren't able to incorporate at this time, but we'd like to review in a larger or different context. First is the parking requirements. This is something that we really don't tie our parking requirements to zones per se unless it's in the central business district, but really to uses. And we recognize that there are some uses where we may be requiring too much or not enough parking, and that's really something that we would like to look at as a separate, more comprehensive zoning amendment review. Our lighting standards in the zoning ordinance are not very specific at all. We probably, and do in fact have a plan in our work plan to take a more comprehensive look at lighting in all zones and for all uses, and look at state-of-the-art ways to minimize lighting to protect adjacent uses. So we'd like to take a little more careful look at that, not just in the B1, but in any of the commercial zones where there might be impact on residential areas. Next, on hours of operation, there was some discussion about including this explicitly in the B1 district, and here we feel that this is a tool that could be used in any of the districts as one of the items in considering a special use permit or a conditional use permit, that this could be one of those items where the zoning board or city council or plan commission may be find it prudent and necessary to limit the hours of operation. We believe that we have that ability currently. However, it does need to be tied to the general health, safety, and welfare, so there needs to be a good reason to do that limitation, and this is something that if we can clarify in the zoning ordinance, we will. But and there's an internal memoranda that I passed out from Jack Waller just specifying where and how this can best be used. But again, this is an issue that would not just be limited to the B1 district. So we have attached highlighted changes to the portions of the zoning ordinance where revisions are recommended, changes to the table of uses as discussed into the various sections on land use buffering and signage, and then there's an ordinance that incorporates these as well. And I'll do what I can.
Okay, any questions? Ms. Chenoweth?
Yeah, I have some questions, and I do want to state that I would like there to be I encourage that, and I also will be deferring this for 2 weeks, simply because I think it's such on City Council to look at this over the weekend, and I would like to talk to my constituents as well as small businesses that may be interested in relocating into this kind of zoning to see what their feedback is. But I will do that after conversation has wound down. My questions are, where did the 2,500 square foot number come from?
We met internally and talked about businesses in town that we felt really fit the definition of kind of a benign neighborhood business, and we got actual sizes to relate to. It was less than we first thought. Started out with 5,000 square feet, and no, 2,500 was really the size of a small commercial lot, and so we felt that was a good, safe number to go with.
So does that mean that, say, I think last week we learned the Michelle's Bridal Shop, which is not in a B1, I believe it's in B3, but just people know that piece of property. I believe that was slightly over 3,000 square feet. So something like Michelle's Bridal Shop, which I would consider to be pretty innocuous, because of its type of use than perhaps because of its size,
right.
would not be allowed in the B1 zoning. So Michelle's is one of the ones that, not Michelle's in particular, a business like Michelle's that wanted to locate in B1 would not be allowed to under these numbers.
If it,
Apparel shop, it would be under apparel shop for
okay,
conditional use.
that is, oh, that would be allowed by conditional
So
use.
it would have a conditional use permit because it's greater than 20, okay, I missed that, all right. So it wouldn't be not permitted completely, it would be that there's a conditional use permit and that
Exactly.
goes to ZBA. That goes to the
Yes.
zoning board of appeals.
That's right.
Okay, that answered my question. And then the second, just looking on page 3, top of page 3, when you say confectionery products, manufacturing, and packaging, I think of a candy store where the candy's made on site, and I'm trying to figure out why that wouldn't be permitted.
If it was primarily a candy store, it would still be classified as a candy store. I think Rhinos, for example, used to make some of their candies, but if it was a candy factory, then it would allow. I think the manufacturing was something that we felt really didn't make sense in the B1. We don't have one now. I'm not really sure what it's a relic of. But it was something that did the pattern of other B1 uses.
I guess that's counterintuitive to imagine that, say, for example, small entrepreneurs who are starting businesses oftentimes may start businesses in neighborhood locations where rents are lower. So for example, I know we have someone who started a Sprouts company, and he now has a factory out up on High Cross Road, but cottage industry, tofu making factory, Sprouts, candy making, I would imagine that cottage industry kinds of uses, as long as the size and the output, so if there's, for example, crematorium may not belong in a, but something like a candy store, as long as there's not some kind of pollutant, or not candy store, I'm sorry, candy manufacturing, as long as it's a cottage industry scale and doesn't provide pollutants. I guess I'm not sure. I was curious to see what kind of arguments and conversations staff had that would lead you to exclude what had been included in the past, which is these kind of cottage industry uses.
Well, that stuck out as not being similar to any other uses. We weren't really sure where that came from. I think in manufacturing, of course, you think about the raw materials and the shipping, and you're right, the pollutants, noise, if there's, machinery being used, that would be something that would tend to affect neighbors. If it was something, real cottage industry, a home occupation where they're making candy and selling mail order, that would be allowed as a home occupation. The manufacturing and packaging, the shipping, that was something that we didn't feel really fit within this category of uses.
So what I hear, which is that the primarily be pollution, but it might be machine noise and transportation, delivery trucks, particularly.
Yeah, I think anything you can think of in terms of how this operation might work. Like manufacturing, you need raw materials. How are those going to get there? How will they be delivered? How much? Then you have the processing, and that's equipment and safety, and could involve some kind of emission. And then the packaging too, there's raw materials for that, and then there's the shipping. So it just seemed to not fit within the context of B1. It's not to say, again, that you couldn't have a home occupation, or you couldn't have accessory to a candy store or a bakery that might involve these activities and would be perfectly fine. But we didn't see where this really fit in, and not really sure where it came from either, to tell you the truth.
So just so I understand, if there was a retail space and there was an accessory use,
Right.
then, and there was some manufacturing involved, then that would be allowed.
Right.
But if the accessory use was, if it was a primary use, then it would not be allowed.
That's right.
Okay. Just a couple more questions. In the middle of the same page, actually you just answered the question I had. Next, what 7? Just if you could remind the council, What is the maximum allowable size of the one sign that would be proposed under freestanding signs? What's the size we're looking at?
It's 32 square feet in B1.
Okay.
And often what happens for commercial sites, they're on a corner. Zoning would typically allow one freestanding sign for each frontage. Sometimes there's 3 frontages. But in this case, we're proposing an amendment to limit one 32 square foot sign.
Could you explain why? Because I immediately thought of the corner lot situation. I think when you have one right by your business, having one sign makes perfect sense. I don't think, except for maybe an awning or some kind of, hanging sign, attached sign for people who are walking. But why would we signage on 2 sides if it's a corner business and that 2 major right-of-ways, say, for example, Race and Washington, just as one, so that all of the thousands of cars that go by that right-of-way would not see that there was a business there. There wouldn't be a sign to see that there was a business at that location. I consider that to be fairly prohibitive. Now, I think stipulating that for non-corner lots, maybe one freestanding sign makes sense, but I guess I'm just interested in hearing the rationale the staff had for that.
I think we were really interested in having neighborhood business be small-scale type use, and in fact, we have at least one site that's several acres that's zoned neighborhood business, and it's a zone that makes sense for smaller sites, smaller buildings, and when you have a smaller site, smaller building, you don't need as much signage because your frontage is not going to be as extensive. So I think the thought here was, and again, looking at our current inventory of sites and uses, one sign really seemed adequate. Now having different ways you can draw visibility, freestanding sign positions so you get visibility on both streets. You can also use wall signage as a supplement, or canopy signs, or there's no limit even on windows. But I think we're just trying to make distinctions between the neighborhood business areas from the general business areas where you're more driving, there's larger frontages, and you need more of that. So this was something that we were over permitting for B1 and felt that we could draw back and still provide plenty of visibility for these businesses.
Looking at number 8, actually having to do with the sign question, I know we have ordinances about signs, and I can't remember if there's a difference. We looked at materials, sign materials, et cetera. I think we were looking at the downtown, though. Could this freestanding sign be internally lit?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any restrictions on the materials of the signs that we're looking at for B1, whether it be freestanding or wall-mounted?
We have material limitations on the projecting signs that we had that amendment several months, maybe a year or more back, where we're really trying to get more of the projecting signs and ones that were more natural products and not the internally lit. We felt those were really for pedestrians, and those are the only ones. Billboards to get materials and softening with landscaping. Other signage, we limit placement, size, lettering size in some cases. We also have a lot of sign limitations, but also limits on portable signs and temporary signs, and some signs you get permits, some you don't. But for these freestanding signs, basically use standard materials. We actually need an engineer's stamp on these to make sure they're safe and soundly constructed. And if a sign is damaged, that is a violation. We can require replacement of that. So we don't do too much in the way of signage, but we do have some types of signs where we look into that.
And the wall signs and the freestanding signs aren't signs that we restrict. In B1, we do not restrict materials for those 2 signs. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. I think Those were all of my questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a follow-up question. Say that in the B1, illuminated signs are allowed by right?
A lot of the signs you see are internally illuminated. They have a plastic covering, and they're lit from
Right.
inside so they can be visible even during the day. And that's,
But there is
no,
the
no,
question. Okay.
that's what I understood the question was.
There was a case that came up before Zoning Board of Appeals where Jimmy John's was in the B1 district on just south of Nevada on Lincoln, was requesting, if I remember correctly, that was requesting a sign, an illuminated sign, and it was and the request was denied. Although actually nobody has one, so now
They had,
Were they asking for a second sign? Is that what?
there's sign coverage, limitation on sign coverage. I know that was one of the problems. This was before we made the amendments to projecting signs.
I'm just wondering, what would they have had to, if they were going before ZBA and they were requesting conditional use permit, what type of conditional use permit currently would, in the B1 district, would one need for a sign? Or maybe it wasn't conditional use permit, what else would they?
I think they were going for a
Waiver?
variance.
A variance, that was, okay, they were
Yeah,
going for a
and
variance.
I know there was an issue with the coverage, but they might have had another variance issue there too.
It was likely that what they wanted was a second sign, because they have.
They had
Okay.
other signs, but there might have been like a setback. I
Okay.
don't recall.
Well, all right, at any rate, so what we're looking at, the sign on Jimmy John's illuminated would be allowed.
Yes, it's allowed currently. There would just be one fewer of them permitted.
Okay. Do we allow illuminated, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but internally illuminated signs in the R5 or R4 on apartment buildings? Can they do that?
We don't have a lot of direction on those property identification signs, so that could be a gap. I don't know offhand of any that we may not have anticipated that. I don't think we explicitly exclude that, though.
Okay. One last question. This has to do with hours of operation, which I think is really for some of these uses, is really the key issue in the B1, much more so than what type of stuff they sell inside. You gave us a memo just before the meeting from Jack Waller, and I'm just wondering do I understand it correctly that probably under a conditional use or a special use, there could be regulation of hours, but that it would be, I mean, there's a sentence in there that says it would be more defensible if it were, oh wait, where is it? A court would more likely approve the imposition of restricted hours imposed by the council than it would a restriction on hours imposed by the ZBA. That's, well, I guess what I'm getting at is if I have some concerns about types of uses where restriction of hours could be a key factor, and I'm reading this, and I'm seeing it saying that if we really want to restrict hours, it would be safer to put those as special uses.
You know, perhaps in the case of a challenge, but our zoning board does look at very similar criteria as our plan commission does for conditional uses. Conditional uses are a lower level permit limit, but the zoning board has considered several cases where, you know, when will this daycare be open, a part of the permits, and I really do believe this is something that we can do as long as there's a good rationale that, you know, this is a use that's surrounded by residents, there's a concern about parking availability, traffic impact, and that it's tied to those types of impacts. I think what could lead to challenge is it's kind of an arbitrary limiting of hours, the absence of any evidence that would help protect the safety and health and welfare of the area. The reason being that you're likely to get opposition to such limits because they cut into the profitability or the ability to really benefit from the use. So I think it's something, completely agree with Mr. Waller, I think it's something we need to be judicious about, and I believe that we are currently that way. And the other thing, in considering differences between conditional uses and special uses in, you know, the gradation, one's a higher level than the other, is the workload of the different bodies and expertise. I really do feel this is something we could expect from time to time in a conditional use permit. That being said, though, there's all kinds of other factors in deciding whether something's really better suited for conditional use or special use permit, and it's really not that hugely distinctive which one you go to, other than one has one meeting and the other has two meetings.
Right. One last question. And this is serving alcohol. Is there, well, for example, can a fast food restaurant serve alcohol? I realize I'd have to get a permit and all that, but is there anything in the definition of a use that would prevent a fast food restaurant from being an eligible applicant for a license to sell alcohol? And cafe is the other one I was going to ask about.
Okay.
The mayor,
Probably in the
commissioner
liquor-
is saying no.
Certainly a cafe
Cafe
can
could-
get a liquor license, and a fast food restaurant, I don't see anything that would prohibit a fast food restaurant. So there's nothing that prohibits giving.
Okay, and now, I keep saying it's my last question. This one really is my last question. Could the zoning board of appeals, when granting conditional use permit, or the city council in granting a special use permit, impose the condition that the business not apply for a liquor license?
I think that's a good one for Mr.
City
Holtz
attorney.
to mull over, perhaps.
We've got time to mull over.
And-
We've got 3 weeks.
And just to let you know, under food service establishments are silent on serving alcohol, and it really is, I know that we have
Cafes and restaurants are allowed by right under a certain size, and, with a permit over a certain size. If, in any case, the principal use becomes the service of alcohol, it no longer is a restaurant or a cafe, then it's a tavern. And so, now, we don't have any of those where they're sensitive right now, where we have to monitor them, but in that case, if it did come up, then we would have to monitor through an audit, how much of their sales is alcohol, how much is food, how much is other, and determine, what is their principal use. And so, that can get into a tricky area, because we don't have any standards right now to say, for, a cafe can't have any more than 40% alcohol sales. We don't have any guidelines right now. Obviously, if, a cafe were to have, 60% alcohol receipts, then you could say, well, you're not really a cafe anymore, you're more a tavern or a bar, and say that they would have to have a gray area, but not one that we've had to address as yet.
Okay. Maybe we should, although my main concern in the context of the B1 is not someone calling something a restaurant or cafe or fast food restaurant and then really trying to run something that's primarily a bar. It's really just more, my concern probably could be addressed by hours of operation. I was just curious if it could be done a different way, that if, that there are some places that, like a coffee shop seems like a pretty non-intrusive use, but if the coffee shop serves beer and has a live band, it's a totally different matter. And because in terms of the impact on residential uses right next door, because of the noise and the late night traffic and the traffic of perhaps more people who are intoxicated.
call that a use violation. That would, that's masquerading as something you're not, and I think that would be, we would swiftly
But what
act
if it weren't?
against.
What if it weren't masquerading? What if it opened at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week, and from 7 o'clock in the morning until midnight, 5 days a week, it was just a coffee shop, and 2 nights a week from 9 to 12, they had a band. And among the things on the menu were alcohol, that most of their receipts, if there were a standard, but 75% of their sales were food and coffee and non-alcoholic beverages, but they still had this use. I want to make sure we can protect against that use going on in there.
I would argue that that wasn't accessory during those hours, that was a principal use and therefore prohibited if tavern or bar was prohibited in that zone.
Well, what about a restaurant? What about, yeah, right.
Yeah, well, that's an argument,
Yeah.
and the way you can do some of that, I mean, obviously, in some of a couple of taverns in Champaign that are in neighborhoods, the Huber's and I think the Ice House, and they have gone and regulated the hours.
Which was a smart thing to
And
do.
so they said, 11 o'clock on weekdays, midnight on weekends, or something like that. And, even if there was a ban, the noise ordinance is still in effect, and so if they can confine the noise to the building and not have it spill out, that would still be a requirement. So, yeah, I think it's probably possible to create a situation that would be problematic. I think in reality it's relative to come back and well, I guess that would be a question. Can you regulate hours after it's permitted?
Mr. Holtz is nodding his head in one direction.
Well, I think the mayor's question was going a slightly different direction than what I thought, but bear in mind that that the council has the authority to regulate hours outside of the zoning ordinance. So you're talking more in terms of general regulatory power rather than specifically geared to this particular use. Obviously, then that brings up all different other kinds of issues, like if you impose hours, then you're going to wind up imposing hours across the board throughout the city for that particular type of business. But and that's where I thought the mayor's question was going. So when you saw me nodding my head, that's what was going on in my head.
Well, what if it were more like the Huber's example is a good one. That's a bar in Champaign that's in a totally residential neighborhood, and I forget exactly. It's closing earlier than any other bars. But let's go back to the restaurant. It could be just a restaurant like Perkins, or just a restaurant, but decides maybe the restaurant's been there for several years, and then they decide that they're going to have live entertainment, or they apply for a liquor license. At that point, could you say, okay, but only if you're open, if you close at 11 p.m., or is it too late because they already exist by right and can be open 24 hours? And that's why I haven't heard the Perkins has any intention of doing this, but just because they're a 24-hour place. Could a place that's open 24 hours decide to do something different? But it's still primarily a restaurant. Most people are going there and they're eating food, but it's also doing this thing that's making noise.
Yeah.
And attracting a more active crowd, which could have a negative impact on a single-family home next door if there were one.
Probably a nuisance would be, if it's active and noisy, then need to look at nuisance or noise, or if the basic use remains and is permitted, and that hasn't changed.
Okay. It seems the uncertainty here gives me the impression that that's a decision that really needs to be made up front, that at the time that if something does have a conditional or special use, that's the time to impose hours of operation or
Get good information. I think that's part of what, in the hearing process, there's a discussion, what are you really proposing and how's it going to operate, and what's the business plan. That's a good way to kind of unearth what the real concerns might be. Now, if that's been misrepresented or changes, then that, if it is a special use permit or a conditional permit, that can be withdrawn.
I'm more concerned that we don't anticipate it, and then we're sorry, so we should try to anticipate it. Thank you. I don't have any more questions right now.
Any other questions at this point?
Regarding the buffer, the screening, when you talk about wood or masonry, is it right to understand that you're thinking not like a picket thing where the car lights can't go through to the other side?
Solid, and I know there was a lot of discussion at Plan Commission about appearance and how do you really affect that, and this is after a few meetings they came up with.
Okay. And does it say solid, or is it just that's understood because, I know in all the buffers where I've seen the wood fences, I've always seen the solid fence, but just to to
It says wood, it doesn't say opaque.
Is there, well, if you want to, I understand we're not going to be voting
Yeah.
on this tonight, but
This might be something I need to, because I wasn't at all those meetings, I might need to find out if that was deliberately left out.
okay.
If they felt there were some fences that had some openings that they wanted to include.
Okay. Yeah, it seems, if we wanted to have some openings up at the top or something like that, but at least 3 or 4 feet base seems to make more sense to buffer car lights and that sort of thing. With regard to lighting on page 5, I know this is an issue I periodically get calls about, and it seems that's lighting issues in general. Do you think we'd look in the future at how high how high the pole is? Because we don't want to, I guess when we talked about Walmart as well, there was, someone came up later and talked about not just that the light shouldn't go its catty corner or across the street, but also depending on how high the poles are, I think would cause either less or more lighting to go to places that it's not wanted. So is that part?
That could be, I've been thinking also about the type of illumination. There's some that's brighter than others. We can specify the type of lighting. We can specify intensity, quantum. I think the direction. Already we have the screening required, but we're not very specific about it. And we've had a number of compliance cases, and we've just worked individually, case by case, to mitigate the problem. But it would be nice for businesses as well to identify what's going to be an acceptable lumen level or type of element, height, screening provisions. So I would imagine we'd just get a lot more specific, and as always, we'll look to what other communities.
With the lighting issue also, I think one of the things to consider, and maybe it would be in a future ordinance rather than this one, but with regard to the outdoor lighting when the business is not in operation. Hours of operation, and say, that certain businesses or none of the businesses in B1 would be open past 11 p.m. or 9 p.m. or something like that. If there's lighting on the, or a whole bunch of lighting that's on the parking area, that is the external, that might not mitigate some of the issues that we're trying to mitigate with hours of operation. And we want enough. I see the benefits of the perhaps allowing internal illumination.
Reasons, and I'm sure that's a concern. I don't know if employees are working late or it's the security for the business as well. So I know that will be one of the other factors that we look at, but I'm aware that other communities are limiting that after-hours lighting as well. So.
And it might make sense, to allow lighting right around the perimeter of the structure, but how much that is, I think, might be another issue. And then with the freestanding signs, and as Ms. Chenoweth had brought up, it seems to me, if I recall correctly, that when we were dealing with the video store, that was up on Lincoln, that the family video store had a right to have 2 small freestanding signs, and they said, well, instead of that, can we have 1 larger freestanding sign? And if I'm remembering that right, is that part of the motivation in going to just 1 freestanding sign, is so that the businesses can't just bargain away that for a bigger sign than they would otherwise get, or was that?
We did think about the video store, and this wasn't so much the trade-off that's often used, we'll reduce the number and go bigger, and we do still see that in B3 zones. It was more what seemed to be necessary in B1. And I do think there is a trade-off in having fewer signs, one that might be somewhat bigger, but you have fewer signs. So I still think that's something the zoning board's probably going to continue to see variance requests based on that.
Thank you.
Other question? You were saying that when you were checking the inventory of the B1 properties that we have, there's one that's several acres, you said? Right?
That's not built on. The one I'm thinking of is the Behringer Commons site. on catty corner from Walmart. Actually, that's zone B1, not built on. It's several acres, and it just seemed that B1 really should be smaller scale sites, smaller scale buildings. The question about maximum square.
A functional maximum based on the maximum lot size or anything of that nature?
We don't have maximum lot sizes.
Don't have a maximum lot size?
Not in
for
B1.
Something that would say, well, this is too big for B1, you have to go for a B3 zoning?
Right. We don't have that, but that is something we could have looked at.
But in our inventory right now, you think there's only one B1 site that is over an acre, or? Most of them, I mean, the ones that I'm envisioning, like the Sweet Betsy's and the Sunshine Grocery and so forth, are, you know, small, you know, under an acre, maybe a half acre or something like that.
Where's the biggest one you were talking?
About 8 acres. I think you're right. Most of them are, you know, the size of 1 or 2 small-sized city lots. We have one along Washington. I don't even think that's in. It's around the Rainbow View Apartments. I think that's an office use. Their size as well. This one here.
Yeah. Well, at some point it might be useful to consider what would be a maximum size for either a B1 lot or a maximum size for a building, and because it doesn't seem like a huge business would be compatible with the residential nature.
That might be something we'll look at again in the interim. I think it would fit within the parameters of this text amendment.
Well, I can see, you know, when you say there's 8 acres of B1 out by Behringer Commons, it might be useful to have that much acreage, but cut up into smaller lots so that no one business could be of size greater than, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 square feet or something. I don't know what it would be, but it seems like there should either functionally be a maximum or actually be a maximum on those. But any other questions, Ms. Chenoweth?
Yeah, just our discussion raises just greater. I mean, is there some kind of gradations of business zoning that would fit in between B1 and B3, given that we're kind of restricting B1 with some of these changes?
Made very few limits on the uses allowed in B1, but we've required more that would need a special use permit or conditional use permit. So I don't think we're saying no businesses over 2,500 square feet. It's just that that would involve a review of a site plan and perhaps hours of operation and the context, kind of the privilege of being close to your customers, I suppose. To answer your question, we do have a B2 zone, neighborhood business arterial. I know there's some properties along Springfield that have that designation. We have a lot of other intermediate type zones. MOR is one that comes to mind that allows some business uses but has development standard restrictions. B3U was envisioned as a zone that had more than just apartments in it. CCD, the one on campus, could potentially be a very good neighborhood business zone. So I think we do have some other opportunities here.
Yeah, just to clarify, maybe my original statement was misunderstood. I think that the goal of these changes is to be able to say to a business owner, here is the designations, there's a kind of consensus. It's going to be a lot easier for you to do so because you won't have the kinds of concerns from residents, because those concerns have been addressed through good planning practices. And so I support the direction that this is going in. I think it's appropriate. And I think that our goal should be to be able to hand something to a new entrepreneur or a business who wants to relocate into Urbana and say, here are our constraints. They fit on one page. You can read them. And these are things that will make it easy for you to develop in our neighborhoods and be compatible with the neighborhoods so that there isn't friction between the neighborhood and the business. So I support the direction. My concern is in making something that is neighborhood business that kind of constrains that to something that is more palatable in a residential setting than I think what we have currently. We kind of create a gap, and I would be interested in, I will look at the zoning map between now and our vote to kind of look at where B2 is indicated, because that might be a good kind of second stage. And we may want to really look not only at B1, but kind of what are our gradations of business zoning. The second question I had is, as you were doing surveys of neighborhood businesses or businesses in B1, and you looked at square
Family video.
Okay, the parcel size is on the back here.
I may need to go back and sketch some of these in. I think we felt like the Jimmy John's Cafe Paradiso fit within that. Sunshine Grocery fits within that. Sweet Betsy's, Secondhand Rose. The art studio, I think, is within that. So we're probably, and then we have so many that are not actually being used for retail businesses. We have some offices, just a variety of uses.
When you said that the Jimmy John's doesn't fit in that,
It does. I think that fits within the...
6,800 square feet. Oh, just because you took those two together, and they're actually zoned separately?
Oh, it's all in here. Jen, look at this. Okay.
It says 6,800 square feet, so...
That must include more than their store. That's the
Paradiso.
Jimmy John's and the... Might be pushing it, but...
Mhm.
Sunshine, well, that's 2,600. That includes the video next to it. So I think some of these are...
Can I ask just a follow-up question on that? When we talk about 20, this kind of answers my question. There are some places that have 2 stories, and in those cases, square footage on the second floor counts towards this total 2,500 square foot limitation. Is that correct?
It should be the gross square footage of the business.
The gross square footage. That means all floors except basement.
If the second floor is not part of the business, if it's rented out as apartments, that would be separate.
Okay, so gross square footage of the business.
Yeah.
And if it was the office for the business, would that be considered a business part of the use?
I think so. If it's gross, that would be.
Including office?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, I had another question, which is, you had mentioned some of these things are being used as offices. Currently, I look at the permitted uses, and I don't see office as a use. Would offices be permitted? So,
I think it's just not one that we changed.
okay, so it would be allowed.
So
Office use would be allowed by right?
it was just one that we didn't change the category on. The table's attached, and it would be,
Oh, I see. So that just indicates the changes, not the complete number of uses.
yeah, you'll want to look at the,
So offices are permitted by right, is that correct?
I'm looking for it now.
Okay.
Professional and business office permitted by right. B1 really has a wide range of business uses that's allowed, which is part of why we came with this text amendment. It was and still is very permissive.
Mm-hmm. So it is allowed. The answer is yes. it
Yeah.
is allowed. Okay. And do you predict that these changes would allow us to zone more spaces in Urbana B1?
I can think of a proposal at Southridge that this might have helped with. So possibly, hopefully, yes, this could.
Would Southridge, it was Carl Hill who was developing Southridge?
Right, he
Would Carl Hill
proposed,
be able to come to the city council and ask to rezone some of the area that was zoned residential into B1? He can repeat his request?
If he wanted to, he did propose to limit the uses, so I think at the time it was just a concern about other business space on Philo, concern about the need, but perhaps with the text amendments, there can be neighborhood businesses, not always going to be the family video,
I think
the
people
small
are
big
worried
box,
about a
but could be more of the
McDonald's
smaller
with the-
use. I do think that the Behringer Commons site, even if it was broken up into many different lots, does seem to no longer fit the need and definition for neighborhood business, but that's something perhaps we can visit down the road.
Okay. That's all for now.
Questions? All right. So, you want to, I guess technically we should have a motion and a second first and then a deferral.
Sure. For the sake of discussion, I move approval.
Second?
We have a motion for approval and a second. Is there any discussion? You want to allow discussion before deferring or?
Sure. You have to.
Yeah, well.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I guess that's true.
Ms. Pat?
No, that's good. Ms. Chenoweth wanted to
I think
discuss
she
first.
wants
Go
to
ahead.
allow, you were going to defer at this
Yes,
point.
I had a question to council about deferral, but go ahead, Ms. Pat.
Well, I circulated something before the meeting, and just something to think about for when this comes up again, which won't be, it'd be better if they were special use permits. And my main concern really does relate to hours of operation and some of the things that I mentioned in questions about uses that could very easily be totally non-obtrusive and exactly what we want, but could also be the types of things that conflict with appropriate neighborhood environment. And although, as we're sitting here talking and looking at the table uses, I realized maybe I didn't really hit on it on exactly that maybe fast food should be in there too, but I'm thinking that if cafe and restaurant were required with a special use permit rather than a conditional use permit, that that would provide a better opportunity for city council to have control to ensure that those are businesses that do not inflict intensive activity, noise, traffic, et cetera, on neighbors. And the other one is drive-through facility. And actually, I was speaking, Ms. Tyler mentioned there's not a really big difference in the words, although there's a little bit of a difference in terms of the definition, well, this isn't really definition, but the description of them. And one of them, and I think of this particularly with regard to drive-through facilities, is that for a special use, it is something that, because of its potential major impact of its scale and nature on its district and the city as a whole, necessitates close examination, site plan review. But the other thing, to be quite honest with you, is the difference between whether something's decided by city council and by zoning board of appeals. And in addition to the remarks in Mr. Waller's memo, I think there's just also a dynamic of big stuff, little stuff, and smaller things get the little stuff gets decided by zoning board of appeals, and bigger things come to the city council. When something goes to zoning board of appeals, everyone who lives within 250 feet of the property gets a notice. The zoning board of appeals meets, they decide, and it's over. And when something, with a special use permit, if it's something that has to come to city council, it will go to meeting. And so if it's something that is going to have an impact beyond 250 feet, maybe it's something that's better to have come before the city council. That's just just something to, I guess, to think about for the next couple of weeks as we look at this. Overall, I think this is a good set of recommendations, and I think it would help make it easier to, in new subdivisions, or just actually anywhere, maybe even existing neighborhoods, but especially the problem we came up with that with Southridge, that might be easier to make a B1 lot acceptable in the residential area if people felt that the law protected them from uses that really are inappropriate in the residential area. But I would like to discuss when we take this up again a few other changes, and I hope folks will give them some thought.
Okay, any other discussion at this point? Chenoweth?
I have a question to council members. I'd like to, as I said, defer this so that we have the opportunity to spend a little bit more time with it. As you know, Plan Commission, I believe, discussed it either over 2 or 3 meetings. It was 3 meetings, and it's been in the works for a year. I think staff's done a great job to pull together a number of conversations that have happened, and I don't want to rush something through that is so important to kind of the few and invite members of the business community. That would make the next council meeting that we could discuss it April 19th. And so I would like to check with staff, the mayor and council, to see if there is any reason why we couldn't hold off until that time to have it before council.
Don't have any pending requests.
Okay. All right, so I would move to defer this plan case, what's that?
Or just move to send it.
I move to send it to our April 19th council meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to send this to the meeting on April 19th. Any discussion? Yes.
I'll just mention that the Representative Coffey's exact date is Tuesday, April 6th. The coffee will be at 8 p.m. in the evening, 8 to 9 p.m. in the evening at a location that is to be announced, so folks can come to Chenoweth to find out exactly where we'll be hosting the meeting.
Okay. No discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries, and we'll see that in what? It's 5 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, next up on the agenda is an ordinance approving a preliminary and final plat, the Ridge subdivision plan case number 1881-S-08.
This subdivision is located at the southwest corner of Amber Lane and Myra Ridge Drive. It's part of the Stone Creek development. It would involve common lot line development with 5 triplex buildings and 5 duplex buildings for a total of 25 lots, and would be similar but smaller lots to the Vistas, which were developed for multifamily residential, and access would be from a new street called Lydia Court West, extending west from Myra Ridge Drive, and ending in a cul-de-sac. There are 3 waivers proposed as part of this subdivision plat. The first would be to allow a reduction in the right-of-way width for Lydia Court from 60 feet to 50 feet. And the rationale here is that it would not be a highly traveled or traffic-generating court. It's just a simple cul-de-sac for serving just these lots that are proposed. So no need to oversize that, and a similar waiver to reduce that larger local street pavement width, and it is something that we've proposed waivers in the past in the interest of slowing down traffic and creating a little more pedestrian-friendly environment. The third waiver relates to the sidewalk network. From existing sidewalks on Amber Lane and Myra Ridge Drive, and we have proposed 2 alternative sidewalk layout plans, both of which would involve a technical waiver from the subdivision ordinance. The first is the sidewalk plan A that's attached, and this provides a little better access and staff's opinion to existing development to the east, because it would include a proposed mid-block sidewalk, and then it would provide sidewalks for those lots that don't have, otherwise have sidewalks. Proposed by Plan Commission is alternative sidewalk Plan B. Provides a little less access, but it's a more complete sidewalk network, so there's a little bit of a trade-off here. The developer has informed me that either plan is fine. They do prefer sidewalk Plan A, but really either one would be acceptable. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions at this point? Questions, a motion would be in order?
Move approval. Second.
Yes, Ms. Pat?
Clarification, you're moving approval of the Plan Commission recommendation, which would be?
Let's see. I'm moving.
That's the one where the
approval
sidewalks all the way,
of
instead of the little cut
the
of the
Plan
whole.
Commission recommendation.
Recommendation. Okay,
Right,
thank you.
second. And I have a question.
We have a motion and a second, Ms. Chenoweth.
Just so I understand the subdivision ordinances, because I haven't seen that before.
Technically, this is why it's a waiver. Full compliance would involve sidewalk going all the way around the cul-de-sac, yet there's, just because of the configuration of the subdivision, there's really no homes that would benefit from that.
But yeah, I'm looking at, let's see, 110 and 109. Would that sidewalk go all the way to the driveway of here, because we can't see we don't see site plans, but,
This is a little generalized.
is there some way to, do we need to clarify that in the motion, or is that something that is understood? I assume that this map becomes part and parcel of the agreement.
I think it's understood that it would go to wherever the pedestrian would exit the home, right? Yeah, that's the intent.
Oh, it says here, all sidewalks will connect with driveways in order to give all units access to sidewalk. Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Otto?
On the west side of the site is a commercial property, and I guess it's anticipated to be a Myers, or nobody knows what they're going to do with it. But you know, one of the principles of walkable neighborhoods to have be able to walk from your home to commercial properties on the sidewalk, and it seems to do that is to go ahead and extend the sidewalks over there to the west side of the property, so that, you know, people won't have to walk through a muddy area or some area like that to get across to Myers, and they won't have to walk all the way back out to the main road to get across to Myers. Well, I guess if you'd like to respond to that, Libby, or what their thoughts are on that.
I think there was discussion about that, and that's really how the Plan A came about. Subdivision requires sidewalks along the street. That connection is already made along Amber Lane.
Mm-hmm.
So to provide an additional cut-through was something that the West was not something that the developer felt comfortable with, and is not something that we would require as part of our subdivision. The mid-block sidewalk shown in Plan A was a way to at least have people living in the end of the cul-de-sac not have to cul-de-sac to get to my Ridge Drive, but in terms of accessing the commercial to the west, they would need to go up to Amber Lane.
Okay.
It's just a matter of that whole, yes, connectivity and access is good, but then there's the separation of uses and the privacies that come up, and you know, just the concern of people who may not be connected with the kind of having an invitation to access what's essentially a backyard. That was a concern.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
One other question. Have we moved Plan B or Plan A?
Plan B.
Okay.
Discussion? Call the roll.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 ayes. And last is a discussion on ward redistricting. So we've had a couple of public hearings, a few public comments. Yes, Ms. Chenoweth?
I believe today we're not making any motions. I did just want to make council members aware of a conversation I had with Ms. Pat. I believe it's relevant to board map Plan B and not A. After our discussion at the last hearing about kind of keeping neighborhoods together, I supported the argument that being coupled with its surrounding neighborhood, that I believe it kind of that neighborhood, there's an identity that goes all the way to Cunningham Avenue. Similarly, there's a piece of property to the south of University. If you look at proposed ward map Plan B, and you look at apartment building, there's a neighborhood organization there in Ward 2, roughly speaking, and those properties are kind of part of the identity of that neighborhood, and the fact that they are districted into a different ward, I think creates a problem. One of the criteria that I use when looking at these maps is of identity, where neighbors can call one another up, know who their alderperson, get in contact with that alderperson, share information about the alderperson, about policies, etc. So there's something about preserving that's important. And so I wanted to hear from council members if there were any concern, me pursuing with Ms. Pat, if that becomes the map of choice, at least because I know that the mayor's map takes care of that concern, that if there are any concerns that we did look at the numbers, and that would add an additional 119 voters, or maybe is it residents or voters?
Residents. It's all residents,
it's residents.
not voters.
Okay, so, yeah, that's why we have all these.
82.
That's why FAR, PAR is the way it is. So, and possibly take a bite out of Ward 2, and part of Ward 3 includes things south of University Avenue and now west of, what is that, Gregory Street. And we would take some of the corner of that and include it in Ward 3 as a trade-off. So I guess I was interested in hearing from council members if they had any concerns with me pursuing some of those changes.
Ms. Wyman?
And on Griggs Street, for those who aren't quite as familiar, on Main Street at Landmark Apartments, if you go to the other side of Landmark Apartments and cross Griggs Street, you've got the other part of Landmark. So it also makes sense as far as it's an apartment complex. People cross Griggs Street to pay their rent at Landmark Apartments. So it's all right there. Of course, in the SRO at 306 West Griggs, I think it makes sense to keep that in Ward 2. The university is a very strong dividing line with the hospital, with traffic, with commercial, goes along University Avenue. So I think it makes sense to keep the Leal Park, the apartment building, the SRO apartment building, and Landmark Apartments with the Griggs Street address in Ward 2 as well. I think it's a good idea.
Discussion on that?
Yeah, I also think it's a good idea. Actually, when I originally worked up this map, I didn't have all the annexations right in Ward 5, and so I had the population 88, but with the annexations it went up to 5,377. Prior to my having that information, it was necessary, as I mentioned when we presented the maps last week, wards 3 and 5 on map B here are almost identical to the way they are right now on the existing map, and which I found very attractive, moving as few people as possible, but it was just a little too small, and so I went ahead and took that bite out that Ms. Chenoweth wants to fix. But with the annexations, that brought Ward 5's population up to 7, making it actually the largest of all, not counting the projection on Ward 4. So if we took those people out of Ward 5, as Ms. Chenoweth suggests, and put them into Ward 2, would drop the population of Ward 5 to 5,258, which would be more consistent with the size of the other wards, also room for growth. Also, and probably this is the most important, it splits one less precinct, and that's really a goal here. Trying to divide 23 precincts into 7 wards, and precincts are drawn by voter size and wards are drawn by population size. It's precincts. And I didn't want to split 7, but that was the only place I could see to take it out. This would make all of Cunningham 7 in one ward right now, so that would be a positive. It would bring down the population of 5, which would be more appropriate. We took those 2 north corners out. That's a total of, if we just took from Gregory to Lincoln, from Clark Street north, actually it's 1 block, but it's 2 census blocks, and I see why, but if you, which is actually, is that right now in Ward 3? I forget.
North side of Clark is Ward 3.
Okay, so this would just move it down. The north side Clark is, yeah, all right. So this would make it it would make Ward 3 almost identical to what it is right now. Then that would bring Ward 3's population to 5,274, which is still consistent with all of these others, and Ward 2 to 566. So overall, I guess that was a long explanation, but this was thank you, Ms. Chenoweth, because it fixes if we were to go with map B, splits 1 less precinct and helps balance out the population a little better between wards 5. So I think that'd be a good idea, and I will some form that people can look at it so they know what we're talking about. Well, actually, I have pages I can just photocopy little pieces so you can look at it.
Any other discussion? Ms. Wyman?
I have a question on the official ward map that, if you look in, on the east side of town on, for wards 5 and in Behringer Commons, so you look north of, or University Avenue North on the east side next to High Cross Road, shaded as Ward 6, purple wards, part of Ward 6, and my recollection in annexations when we were annexing Behringer Commons, well, I guess it's that we annexed it all into one.
And as Behringer Commons developed years ago, there was an annexation agreement that allowed them to, that required them to develop to city standards, but allowed them to stay outside of the city for a period of 5 years per phase. So when it was first annexed, then those were annexed into Ward 6 because that was the only thing that was contiguous. When we had the annexation agreement, when we were talking about Big Grove, then the rest of it came in, and that's what you see in Ward 5. Most of what is in Ward 5 right now is actually planned but not developed. Now there has been some development in some houses there, but most of that is still vacant.
And did we vote to put it there, or I guess?
Yeah, and in all of the annexation ordinances where there's a question by the ward that goes in.
And so, okay, because what I'm recalling is 1 or 2 times when we were annexing parts of Behringer Commons, issue came up, and it was when Jack Waller was still full-time with us, and I think then we drew it in.
Well, most of that is right, because when we annexed several parcels of Behringer Commons in the early phases, and they did not all come in at the same time. And there were some that came in willingly, and then there's some that we had to enforce the agreement. They came in various times. So most of it would have been, the actual axing would have been into Ward 6. But it was during the Big Grove annexations that and see, the owners of Behringer Commons at that time agreed to annex the entire thing and put into 5.
And so the majority of the population in Behringer Commons is in Ward 6, the part that's most developed now. Is that right? Okay. Thank you.
Now, following up on point about not splitting a part off where the boundary of that Leo Park area, and Ms. Wyman's point about University Avenue being a strong dividing line, a natural dividing line there's another obvious parcel that sticks out being added to Ward 5 that really belongs to the surrounding neighborhood in Ward 6, and that's the Scottswood area. It's clear that that neighborhood is being isolated into a different ward by putting it into Ward 5. There it geographically belongs, which would be Ward 6. So I would say that all the arguments that apply to the area that Ms. Chenoweth was Ward 2 would also apply to the Scottswood area, which in Plan B is in Ward. In the Plan A that I promoted, I took care of that problem by putting that in Ward 6 and using Washington Street as a strong dividing line, using the arterial. And so squaring 5 and 6 off to a large extent, with 6 generally being south of Washington, or actually entirely south of Washington, and 5 being generally north of Washington, with the exception of that small area across from Prairie School. My Ward 5 line follows the precinct line. So if council members are considering putting neighborhoods in context and having neighbors who have the same representatives, council members should consider that Scottswood area, using the same arguments that Ms. Pat, Ms. Wyman, and Ms. Chenoweth have used for the part they were just in Ward 2 and Ward 5 of Plan B. So I would urge you to give strong moving that into 6 and changing the boundaries so that neighborhood would not be isolated and neighbors would be talking to neighbors who have different council members if it's adopted as it's be.
I guess Ms. Chenoweth, Mayor Satterthwaite, Ms. Pat, and I now all support. It seems like if we're to use the same argument of a strong dividing line with this street, that with Cunningham Avenue we don't want to isolate Lakeside Terrace, which is my concern. Cunningham Avenue.
Yeah, on my map, I would be happy to look at alternatives that would either put that back in Ward 3 or some way of drawing that so that stick out. So I'd be happy to work on that if council members would. If it's going to do so, I would be happy to do it. In fact, as Mr. Marlin was suggesting, maybe the dividing line in 3 should be Cunningham Avenue, and looking at ways to shift population from 5 into 3, maybe from 3 into 2 and 2 into that. Rotate those around, either Plan A or Plan B. That would be a common sense, a common sense boundary. And one other point that I would like to address is, Ms. Pat made the point that, well, there be in her map Plan B that we want to have an opportunity for growth in 5. Well, her map in 5 has very little growth opportunities. All the growth opportunities virtually are in Ward 6, which could possibly create the dynamic that we have right now, where Ward 6 in the current map is about 20% larger than the smallest wards. I believe 1, 2, and 4 are some of the smallest wards we have in the current map, and 6 is some 20% larger. That sets up the same dynamic where over the course of the next several years before the next census, that 6 could be well out of compliance because all of the growth areas, virtually all of our active subdivisions that building is going on in right now, are in Ward 6. That's a terrible imbalance if we're trying to plan for the future growth of our community map. Pat.
One, as far as that finger down south of Washington, I'll look at it again, but this is not, this was nothing I dreamed up. The map's been that way. If you spend hours trying to draw the map, you see why. Okay, you take Ward 5, we could just smaller, but then it would be way too small because it would only have 4,700 people in it. So you have to take a bite out of something. And as you go around where the borders of Ward 5 with other wards, you're going to have that same problem wherever you go. The 3, as the mayor did in Map A, but then you separate a community of geographic boundary. I think, and Mayor said he's agreed, he'd be happy to do it someplace else. I think Lakeside place to take the bite. You could go ahead and take a bigger bite into Cunningham 7. In fact, I don't know how much I have to look at the population 7. You might have to take most of it and put that into Ward 5 to make up for taking that Scottswood Manor out. Ward 4, then you have to push Ward 4 east. Actually, I'm looking at the, and there isn't that much really, I mean, if you do that to the west, if you go south, you start running into a problem. Like, I mean, you'd still be taking another bite south. So if you want to take the bite south of Washington, and the problem is that's already a split precinct, because the precinct runs from Washington all the way down to Colorado. And so you can't, you have to be splitting it 3 times. The next place over would be taken in Cunningham 16, going between Anderson and Cottage Grove, and I suppose that would be a place where you could do it, but that precinct's already divided between 2 wards, so you'd have to shift some there. I suppose that maybe that's a place that could be done. And then if you don't take that particular census tract, everything else east of that finger down below Washington that you want to cut out, you'd still have to go dip below Washington. You would just dip below Washington in different places, and that's the problem. Even if you switch Behringer Commons and Scottswood Manor, you still come up short of population. You have to find a place to take it out, and when you take it out, it moves it. I don't know. I can't visualize
it's too
it all,
hard.
but
Right.
you know, but that can be done. I mean, anything can be done. It's just
It's
that,
too hard to do without
Yeah.
taking a look at the numbers.
yeah. So that's just the thought. And
Oh.
yeah, no, that's right. I mean, that's basically, but just there's that you're still somewhere that when you just look at where Ward 5 is now, if you want to move it around somewhere, you're going to have to cross a major street. That's something that cannot be avoided just because of the population and the boundaries right now. And there are a lot of other places on the ward map where we do that as well, where we don't have a major street as the boundary. And part of that's because, as I mentioned last week, with Ward 6 and 7, I didn't draw a precinct map that had both Cunningham 21 and Cunningham 23 crossing Philo Road. The reason that my map has 2 wards crossing Philo Road isn't because I don't think Philo is a good dividing line. It's because the 2 precincts, when you go between one precinct, the one on the north side on Florida, Precinct 21 is on both the east and west sides of Philo, and then when you go south down to Windsor, Precinct 23 is on both the east and west sides of Philo, and that's why the ward lines are on the east and west sides, because they're following the precinct lines.
Well, I would suggest that if you want to take care of the Scottswood finger that extends south of Washington, that you take a look at my map, because I found a way to be able to do it. It does include other growth areas into Ward 5, Behringer Commons, and the Sunny Estates, and I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, that the census numbers, if Lakeside Terrace were simply moved from 3 to 5, the population numbers would still be within error or our margin of variation. So I mean, that's a possibility with my map, is just to move Lakeside Terrace from 3 to 5. I think if I remember the number right, but I may be off on a number. I'd have to take a look at the census blocks again.
Look at it again.
But if you want to take care of that Scottswood finger, then, you know, my map is a good place to start. Any other discussion? All right, well, we'll pick this up again in a few weeks, and I'm sure...
You said that people could go on the Urbana website to make comments, as well as come in to the council, to the city building at any time to
Yeah,
drop
we've
in
got
comments?
a public comment box out in the lobby. We've got 4 maps that are out there. It's the current ward map, the proposed Plan A, the proposed Plan B, and the precinct map. Everyone remember to get out and vote tomorrow. We stand adjourned.